Hey there, my name is Jason, and it is such a privilege to be a part of this event along with you on behalf of Resources of Hope. I want to start our time together here by sharing a quick story with you.
Herman and Donna Ostry had a farm outside of Bruno, Nebraska. Farmer Herman had a barn with a big problem. You see, every time it rained, Farmer Herman's barn would fill up with water. One night, he made a joke at the dinner table. If we had enough people, we could just pick the barn up and move it. Everyone laughed. Farmer Herman and Farmer Herman's son Mike figured that if they could get 344 people who could each lift about 55 pounds, then they could move the barn. So on July 30th, 1988, Farmer Herman used a microphone to help everyone know what they should do. When he told them to lift, the barn came up off the ground. Then they marched the barn in a new place that was dry and cozy. And it only happened because 344 people carried it together.
I love the story of Farmer Herman and the 344 people that came around his barn to move it because it paints this beautiful picture of what it is that we're all talking about here during this event. If we're honest, we have to recognize that the foster care community around us is flooded. It's flooded with not enough resources, not enough people, not enough support. And that is why the mission of organizations like Resources of Hope are so important and essential. To flip the script, to gather people around and say it is no longer acceptable for there to be not enough. We believe that more than enough is possible, and we want to move this barn for children and families in the foster care community. The bucket approach is exhausting. Just shoveling out bucketfuls of water. It might make the ground a little less dry for a little while, but what we really need is lasting change and movement. We need you to come around the barn to help carry the weight and to move it to dry ground. You know, Farmer Herman understood a couple of things about moving barns, at least, probably more than a couple, but two essential things that I think are important for us. And number one is that in order to move a barn, you've got to know where you're going. Everyone has to know where they're going. Can you imagine if all 344 people gathered around that barn, Farmer Herman blew the whistle and said go, and everybody started heading in their own different directions. In a matter of less than a second, that barn would have come crashing down. Everyone had to know, here's where we're going. The vision of Resources of Hope is to provide resources to meet the physical and emotional needs of foster youth in central Indiana, and it plays itself out in some very beautiful ways. Through supporting children and families, working with teens, providing training, and much more. The vision is clear. This is where we're headed. We want to see more than enough Resources of Hope to support children and families involved in foster care in central Indiana. And it's going to play itself out in a number of different ways. Let's gather around that vision and collectively say together, we know where we're headed. So principle number one is we've got to know where we're going. And Resources of Hope has painted that beautiful vision of where we're all headed together. Number two, you've got to get some extra folks. You've got to bring other people around the barn. Interesting fact, there were only 143 people in Bruno at the time. And Farmer Herman and his son calculated that they needed 344. So the call was wide. We need more people to help move this barn. The problem is too overwhelming for any one of us to solve. And that's why organizations like Resources of Hope are so crucial. Because they bring others around the table and they say together we are better and more impactful than we could ever possibly be alone. We've got to get some extra folks. You know, we're not all called or created to do the same thing, but we're all certainly capable of doing something. This is the uniqueness of the diversity of community that is wrapped around and carrying the load of resources of hope to move the barn. That we all bring unique and special gifts and resources and experiences and passions to the table. It just makes sense in all of life. Think of it in terms of sports. If everybody ran out on the football field wanting to be the quarterback, it would just be chaos, right? And they would look foolish. But instead, everybody runs out, they know the positions they need to take, they know what their responsibility is, and when everyone does what they're supposed to do, it just works well in the same way. Resources of Hope provides the opportunity for a team of people to come around and to not ask, can I really do something? But instead to ask, what's my something here? I know I'm capable of doing something. What unique gifts or experiences or passions or resources do I have that I can bring to the table to help move this barn? This is the beautiful diversity of community that comes around. It no longer asks, am I really able to do anything? But instead says, what's my something and how can I be a part? Not long ago, I was speaking at an event in Kansas City, and it was catered by a barbecue restaurant. And after the event, the owner of the restaurant comes up to me and introduces himself as the owner of the best barbecue restaurant in Kansas City. Now, if you've ever been to Kansas City, you know that that is a bold, bold claim that this guy felt completely comfortable in making. And I was not going to argue with him. He looked like a smoke pit, smelled like a smoke pit, talked like a smoke pit. If a smoke pit could talk, that's how it would sound. I'm not going to argue with him. I believe you. You have the best barbecue restaurant. I even just ate it, and it was really good. And then he shared a little bit of his story. He said, my wife and I aren't in a position to bring children into our home right now, but that's okay, because we own the best barbecue restaurant in Kansas City. And we've told churches and organizations and agencies and different groups in our community that anytime there's a foster family function or a new placement is placed into a home or training, call us. We want to be the first there to bring the best barbecue in Kansas City for free. And I love that. I love that this is a guy who says, I know what I can't do, but I know what I can do. And what I can do really, really well. That's my something that I'm going to bring to the table to help move this barn. We're not all created to do the same thing, but we are certainly all capable of doing something. So my question for you is this: what's your something? Several years ago, when my oldest started elementary school, we put money on her lunch account so that she could go through the lunch line and give her code, and it would pay for her lunch and she could go on her way. And I didn't think much of it until I checked the balance one day and I found, whoa, there's a lot of money gone and she hasn't bought that many lunches yet. And so I asked her, hey, where's all this money going? And she very sweetly says to me, well, Daddy, I'm buying my friends like brownies and ice cream and cookies. And, hard to argue with that. Like, sweetie, stop being so nice. But on the other hand, it's like, hey, I realize I kind of have to teach her how to use the money that I'm putting on her account, right? I want her to be generous, but I also want her to be responsible. There's a stewardship issue here, and it was my responsibility to help her. We've all been given a lunch account. Some of our accounts are higher, some of our accounts are lower, but at the end of the day, it's less about what's in our account, and frankly, it's more about, are we using our accounts wisely for things that matter? That's the real question. It's less about what we have, and it's more about what we're doing with what we have. The Bible uses an interesting illustration when it encourages us not to store up treasures for ourselves on earth where moth and rust will destroy, but instead to consider how we might use our treasures for things that actually matter. And it's interesting if you think about it. Moths and rust destroy things that are sitting there doing nothing. They're just doing nothing. And they're being given the opportunity to get overrun by moths and rust. And so the encouragement to all of us is to consider, what am I doing with what I have? Is it just sitting there collecting dust being overrun by moths and rust? Or am I using it to invest in things which deeply matter and ultimately have significance? And so for the purposes of this event, our encouragement to you is to consider how your something might be to invest deeply into the work of resources of hope. This isn't an appeal from guilt or manipulation or emotion. This is simply an invitation for you to invest deeply in things that matter. To come around the barn and say, I'm taking my place here and I'm going to help move this thing to dry ground for the sake of children and families in our community. Let's all right now declare that investing deeply in the work of resources of hope for the sake of supporting and training families and children involved in the foster care system is worth our investment. Our encouragement and our invitation to you is this, is to consider how you might invest in something that matters through the work of resources of hope. To see their vision of equipping and supporting and training and providing resources and support and relationships for children and families involved in foster care catalyzed even more. That barn moved to drier and drier ground. How you might come alongside them and add fuel to the fire of the mission of resources of hope. That you might invest deeply in things that matter. That you might not just invest in an organization, but you would ultimately see that you are investing in a generation full of people that are in need of hope. What's your something?